Welcome back, geometry students. This is another Kuta software worksheet tutorial on the midpoint formula. I am Mr. West. Let's get started. The first question here says, find the midpoint of each line segment. Okay, here's what we're doing here. Now, if we're talking about a midpoint, it's kind of tough when it's on a diagonal like this. So essentially, what the theory is, not the theory, but the practice is, if we can find the vertical midpoint and we can find the horizontal midpoint, okay, so somewhere in here, where they connect is going to be our midpoint of this line. Now, why do we do it this way? Well, it's hard to count the units going on a diagonal because obviously when we're talking about units on the coordinate plane, we're talking about horizontal and vertical. Much easier to count on these lines, okay, both horizontally and vertical, than on a diagonal line, okay? So what do we do? Well, like I said, we're gonna count our vertical and horizontal distances, find the midpoint of those, and we are going to put that together to find our midpoint. Now keep in mind, as we find a midpoint, it's going to be the x-coordinate and the y-coordinate for a midpoint. This is our midpoint. M stands for midpoint, okay? And that will tell us exactly where it is in the middle of the line. Now, obviously, it looks like I did not draw exactly in the correct place, but hopefully with some mathematics, we'll be able to fix that. Now, let's go ahead and we'll need to label our points here. So I'm going to go ahead and label, I guess, in pink. So we have this point is -1, 1. That endpoint. It's very important that you consider that these are called endpoints. Then we have this endpoint, and that is, looks like -5, -5. Oops, -1, -1, sorry. -5, -5. Now, what do we do from here? Well, how much does it change from -5 to -1, okay? So what is the vertical distance here? Let's just consider the y's right now. So how much is this distance changing? Well, it's changing 4, okay? From -5 to -1 is 4 units, okay? And because these numbers are pretty easy, we can go ahead and easily calculate our horizontal distance, -5 to -1. Again, it's 4. Well, what's halfway of 4? Halfway of 4 is 2. So we're going to look at 2 units along these vertical and horizontal distances. So if we go 2 units down or 2 units up from the bottom, it doesn't matter. So we could go 2 units down, 1, 2, or we could go 2 units down from the bottom point. We're both going to arrive at the same location along this line right here. Okay, so that coordinate, that y value, where is it? Crosses right here. That is the y value of -3. So we're going to keep that in mind. So y, and we're going to say of the midpoint equals -3 because we just calculated that it's 2 units up from -5 or 2 units down from -1, and we get to the same spot. Okay, now we're going to try to find the midpoint of the horizontal distance. So if we go over 2 units to the right, because it's 4, half of 4 is 2. Or if we go from this left point and we go over 2 units, we both get to the same spot, okay? Now, let me go back here. So what spot is that? Well, we get 1, 2. That looks like we're going to end up at -3 for our x midpoint. Now, all we have to do to get our midpoint is we put our x midpoint and our y midpoint together. So we get -3, -3. So I was wrong in my earlier prediction. And it's going to be at -3, -3, it's going to be this point. So if you look here, it's clearly the midpoint of these values. Now, what's a simpler way to do this process? Well, a simpler way to do this process is to essentially find the average, the measure of center of the x values of the 2 endpoints and the y values of the 2 endpoints. So my ym is going to be equal to y1 plus y2 divided by 2. And my xm, that's the midpoint, the x value of the midpoint is x1 plus x2 divided by 2. Now, what is y1 and x1 and what is x2 and y2? Well, we can just label it however we want. It doesn't really matter which one we label, which endpoint we label x1 and y1. We have x1 and then we call this one y1. It doesn't matter. As long as you're consistent and keep the x1s with the y1s and the x2s with the y2s. Don't ever do something like y1 with an x2, okay? That's not something you want to do. That's bad. So don't do that. And then it's also important that you label your midpoint xm and ym. You want to make sure that is different. You don't want to ever confuse your midpoint with x1 or y1, okay? Very important note there. Okay, so we're done with that. So what was our process? As a kind of a review, our process was, well, if we go about it in this way right here, we're going to label the points. Okay, so number one, label the points. I don't know why I'm so far zoomed out. Label the points, and you want to label x1, y1, x2, y2, x2, y2, and also xm and ym. And one of those is going to be unknown. If you have more than one of those points unknown, then you can't do it. But those are unknowns. Then you're going to plug into midpoint formula. I didn't explicitly say it, but this is your midpoint formula, and then you solve for missing coordinate, or coordinates. So we'll just say coordinate. We'll say coordinates. I changed my mind. All right. So let's do another one. So just real quick to apply this one. So if you're looking for the midpoint of this guy, notice how it's flat. These ones are the easiest because we can just count. So notice how it's just a horizontal change. It doesn't go up or down at all. So we're not going to be dealing with the y's. Now, if we were just looking at this, we could count it like on a number line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is 6 units. So I know half of 6 is 3. 1, 2, 3. So I know this is going to be my midpoint here. Okay, right here. That's the point, -1, comma 2. Now, how does this work with the midpoint formula? Well, first we're going to label. So I'm going to label this is -4, comma 2, and that's my x1, y1. I'll call this one purple. This is going to be my 2, 2. This is my x2, y2, and I'm looking for my xm, ym, looking for my midpoint. How do we do this? Well, for our xm, we're going to add x1 and x2. So that's -4 plus 2. Make sure you're using the x2, okay? And divide by 2, because we're finding the average, the measure of center. Ym is going to be equal to 2 plus 2 divided by 2. Okay? Now, let's go ahead and solve, and then we can find our midpoint pretty quickly. So we get -2 plus 2 is 2 divided by 2 is 1. So I get 1. Oh, but it's negative. So that's why you should not combine steps in your head. So we have -2 over 2. That is equal to -1. This guy, we have 2 plus 2 is 4 divided by 2 is going to be 2. Okay? So if I were to combine this into my midpoint, look what I get. I get -1, comma 2, and that's exactly what we got here. So you can see how the midpoint formula is exactly the same thing as if we applied to any other situation. Okay, so then we have just a bunch of different problems here. I'm going to go ahead and do just maybe one more of these ones, and then I'll show you the bottom section, which is the tougher part. So here, what we're going to do is all we need to do here is we label x1, y1, x2, y2. I'm just going to use one color for this. Our xm is going to be equal to, because we're looking for the midpoint. So we're looking for xm and ym. They are unknown. So we're looking for those two things. So we label x1, y1, x2, y2. x1 plus x2 divided by 2. ym equals y1 plus y2 divided by 2. Our x1s are -4 plus, I like to put this in parentheses, -2 divided by 2. Then we have our y1, 4 plus 2 divided by 2. -4 plus -2 is -6 divided by 2 equals -3. Then we have 4 plus 2 is +6 divided by 2 equals +3. So our final midpoint is going to be xm, ym. That is, what is that? -3, comma 3. And it's as simple as that. I know I did that quickly, but hopefully you can pause, rewind, all that stuff to make sure you understand it. Now, find the other endpoint. This is where it gets tricky. Alert, I'm just trying to get your attention here. This is where you need to be careful. Notice how you're already given the midpoint. So if you're given the midpoint, you got to label it the midpoint, xm, ym. The other one's going to be x1, y1. Actually, I'm going to change color on this one. So what is the last thing you're looking for? What's our target here? Well, if we're looking for the other endpoint, we know we're looking for x2, y2. So we're going to set up our formula exactly the same way. And let me use, I guess, this purple color. So we're going to say xm equals x1 plus x2 divided by 2. Now, our plug-in values are going to be different. Instead of plugging in for x1 and x2, we are going to be plugging for xm and x1. So watch what I do here. I'm going to plug in -9, and I'm going to plug in -1. What is different? Well, we're going to have x2 is our unknown, and now we're trying to find x2 instead of xm. So this is different. Now we have to solve like a regular equation. It's a little bit just more steps than it was before, but the process is pretty simple. We're always going to multiply by 2 to both sides to get rid of the divide by 2. So we get -18 equals -1 plus x2. So we're going to add 1. We get -17 equals x2. So we have our endpoint, which is -17, comma. Now we have to find our y, and I'm just going to do this all in one color, I guess this one. So ym equals y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So my ym is -10. We know that value. We're not looking for it this time. Our y1 is 9 plus y2. That's what we're looking for. So of course we multiply by 2 to both sides first. We get -20 equals 9 plus y2. -9, I get -29 equals y2. And that's how you do these problems, okay? Make sure you understand what I did here. It's just a little bit different. That's why it's so important to label first. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching.